Last week, the Orioles parted ways with 3 of their major league coaches. So the question is now, who will replace them? Buck Britton? Joe Girardi? Our old buddy Ryan Flaherty? I'll try to answer those questions coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, October 15th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to take a look at the potential candidates for the Orioles' 3 major league coaching openings: co-hitting coach, bench coach, and major league coach, after the O's parted ways with Ryan Fredi Gonzalez and Jose Hernandez last week. I've got a long list of guys who could fill all 3 of those roles. Anyone from people who are already in the O's system who could be promoted to some interesting, intriguing names, some you know, some you don't, from outside of Baltimore who could come in and help this major league staff. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So as you all may know already, the Orioles parted ways with 3 major league coaches last week. If you haven't listened to yesterday's episode yet, go back and do that, where I broke down kind of why the O's may have made the decision to, well, it really was more of Ryan Fuller's decision to leave the organization. He was the co-hitting coach, but the Orioles also letting go their bench coach, Fredi Gonzalez, and one of their major league coaches in Jose Hernandez. But what does that mean? That means 3 openings on the big league staff. So we're going to go opening by opening here on today's episode, and I'm going to try to give you some names who could be hired at some point this offseason by the O's in those positions. Now, I did this last year when the Orioles reassigned their pitching coach, Chris Holt, to more of a minor league role. They had an opening. I had a long list of names. Unfortunately, I missed a couple, and none of them were Drew French, and Drew French is who was hired. They brought him in. He was the bullpen coach for the Braves and did a fantastic job in his first year as the pitching coach for the Orioles in 2024. But this year, I am confident. This year, I am confident that at the very least, on my list of names for the hitting coach opening and the bench coach opening, one of them will be the guy who is hired in each of those positions. I'm going to call my shot right now and potentially give you the guys that I might even throw a little wager on, if you could, to fill these open positions. So let's start with the big one, the one that the Orioles fans, a lot of them had been clamoring for, to make a change at hitting coach. Listen, if you want to get my thoughts about how this really would change things, I went on a bit about it on Monday's episode, so make sure and go check that one out. But the short of it is, listen, the Orioles could bring in, and probably will bring in, a new member of their major league hitting staff coach-wise. And Ryan Fuller is no longer part of that team. It does not mean the Orioles are completely revamping the way they coach hitting, the way they develop hitting, all that good stuff. It is just not the case. It is so much ingrained into the entire organization. You're going to tweak things. You're going to make some personnel changes like they did, but it's not going to be this wholesale change that people want for some reason. But let's talk about who could get this co-hitting coach job. And we do know that one of the co-hitting coaches is Matt Borg-Schulte, who was hired at the same time as Ryan Fuller before the 2022 season. Fuller was in the Orioles organization. Borg-Schulte was the AAA hitting coach for the Minnesota Twins. Orioles brought him over, and Borg-Schulte, it seems, will be sticking around in that co-hitting coach. Now, one thing they could do is they could just say, Matt Borg-Schulte, you are the hitting coach, and we only have one, and we don't fill another position. That is absolutely a possibility. But the Orioles and many forward-thinking teams, I do think more coaches, the better, especially those who can do certain things at a very high level. I have a feeling they'll still bring someone in as another co-hitting coach. Now, I think the easiest move would be to promote Cody Asche. Cody Asche was a former big leaguer with the Phillies in the mid-2010s. He was hired by the Orioles in 2022 as the minor league upper-level hitting coordinator. He actually replaced Ryan Fuller in that role when Fuller got promoted to big league co-hitting coach before the 2022 season. And then he was promoted to the big league bench in 2023. And he has been the offensive strategy coach for the Orioles for each of the last 2 seasons. Does a lot for hitter preparation with data, looking at video, helping out hitters behind the scenes. The guys seem to love working with Cody Asche. I think if the Orioles felt like he could handle that step up in role to co-hitting coach, that they would absolutely promote someone like Cody Asche. But there's always the chance that the O's feel that Asche is kind of perfect for his current position, and they would want to go with someone different for that role. So there are certainly some other internal candidates for either a co-hitting coach job, or even if Cody Asche does get promoted, if the Orioles want to backfill Asche's job, they would certainly look at some of these internal candidates. Mike Montville was hired last year as the Orioles AAA hitting coach. Could be a guy. Josh Bunselmeyer was the hitting coach in AA Bowie, was hired by the Orioles in the minor leagues in 2020 and has kind of moved up the ladder every year since. Sherman Johnson, who was hired in 2023 to be Bowie's hitting coach, is now the upper-level hitting coordinator this year. Certainly a possibility. And Brink Ambler. He was hired in 2021, moved up the ranks. He was the lower-level hitting coordinator in the minor leagues in 2024. All those guys, I think, would at least get an interview and maybe have a chance to be promoted to the big league staff on the hitting side. But because the Orioles, were in part making a change here, though, again, the reporting from Andy Kosko of the Baltimore Banner was that Ryan Fuller kind of mostly chose himself to leave the organization. There's certainly a chance the Orioles would look for an outside voice. But as I go through these guys who I think would be candidates if the Orioles look outside for a new co-hitting coach, you'll kind of see the pattern of, okay, they're going to bring in a new face and a new voice and all that stuff, and maybe that new face, new voice could certainly help them in 2025, but it's not going to be some gigantic overhaul. Like, I can tell you right now that the Orioles aren't bringing in, someone like way out of retirement. Terry Crowley is not going to be the Orioles hitting coach. I can promise you Mike Elias is not hiring Terry Crowley, but yeah, he's not coming back as Orioles hitting coach. But here's some interesting external candidates. Jeff Albert is one of them. He is currently the director of hitting for the New York Mets. Albert has actually been around Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal for a long time. He was a hitting coach in the minor leagues in the Cardinals system from 2008 to 2012, back when Elias and Sig were in St. Louis. Then when they went to Houston and Jeff Luhnow did, they brought Jeff Albert with them. He was the Astros minor league hitting coordinator from 2014 to 2017. Then they promoted him. He was the MLB assistant hitting coach for the Astros in 2018. Then he got a big league hitting coach job. The Cardinals hired him back to be their big league hitting coach for 4 seasons, 2019 to 2022. He then left the Cardinals and joined the Mets in 2023 as that director of hitting, has been there for 2 years. That is someone who Sig and Mike know really, really well, and I would not be surprised at all if Jeff Albert gets that job. But there's one guy that I am going to put the name out there for. This is going to be my guess. If you're looking for an official guess on the co-hitting coach for next year, John Mahle is my guess here. He is currently the assistant hitting coach for the Chicago Cubs. He was the Astros hitting coach from 2014 to 2015, back when Mike and Sig were there. And he has been on the Cubs, Phillies, and Angels big league hitting staffs since then. But maybe most importantly, well, not as important as being with the Astros, is that John Mahle has also worked with Brandon Hyde in the past. When Hyde was the first base coach for the Cubs, Mahle was the Cubs hitting coach from 2015 to 2017. So those two know each other well. Elias and Sig know him well. He's going to be my current guess right now for the next guy that they bring in. But there are other names out there. Troy Snitker, Astros co-hitting coach, has been with the Astros organization since 2016, of course, with Mike and Sig. Although it sounds like Troy Snitker is potentially a candidate to get a managerial job this offseason. But if he doesn't, maybe another hitting coach gig with the Orioles could be in his future. Jeremy Barnes is a guy I'm interested in. He is the Mets co-hitting coach at the moment. Worked in the Astros system starting in 2017 before going over to the Mets. And then a couple guys from the Red Sox that intrigue me as well. Ben Rosenthal is currently the Red Sox assistant hitting coach at the big league level. He was a hitting coach in the Astros system from 2017 to 2021, so a couple years there with Mike and Sig. And for a couple years there, he was on the same minor league staffs as Drew French on some of the lower level minor league teams for the Astros. French was the pitching coach and Rosenthal was the hitting coach. And the final guy is Dylan Lawson. He spent this year as the Red Sox upper level minor league hitting coordinator. He was a coach in the Astros system in 2016 and 2017, so Mike and Sig knew him. And he has already been a hitting coach in the AL East. He was then hired in the Yankee system in 2018. Lawson, a very data-driven guy, he worked his way all the way up to the big league dugout and spent about a year and a half as the Yankees hitting coach in 2022. And then part of 2023, Aaron Judge was hurt. The Yankees were struggling, and they did fire Lawson in the middle of last season, but he caught on with the Red Sox. Seems to be a really great hitting mind. And wouldn't that be interesting if the Orioles went and got the guy the Yankees fired and he helped the O's kind of get things back on track offensively in 2025? I think that would certainly be a very fun storyline. But those are my guys. If the Orioles go internally, I would say Cody Asche is the number one option. Then I would go Brink Ambler, then Sherman Johnson. If the O's go exterior, I would say John Malley, the Cubs assistant hitting coach, would be number one. Jeff Albert, director of hitting for the Mets, would be my number two. And then Dylan Lawson would be my number three as my power rankings for who I think could get this Orioles co-hitting coach job. But again, there's always the chance that the O's just say, we won't go with two hitting coaches. Matt Borg-Schulte, it's your job with Cody Asche. Go get it. That's a possibility. One thing we do know, the Orioles will have a bench coach in some capacity. They are going to fill the opening after they let Fredi Gonzalez go after 5 seasons in the O's dugout. The question is, who could it be? Internal promotion? Up-and-coming guy from outside the org? Maybe a former big league manager? All is on the table. I'll run through some names for that open position coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to be buying Orioles tickets on Game Time for a little while, but you can still get some MLB playoff tickets. Listen, we got the CSs going. We got the Dodgers and the Mets in the NL. We've got the Yankees and the Guardians in the AL. If you're taking a trip out there somewhere, go to Game Time and get those tickets because they've got Game Time picks. Their curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. And they've got this all-in pricing, which is great. You turn it on, you get all the totals up front. No surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the next opening that the Orioles have is bench coach. Fredi Gonzalez is out after 5 seasons as the Orioles bench coach. Of course, before that, spent 10 years as a big league manager with the Marlins and the Braves. And so the question is, will the Orioles go with someone else who was experienced for a while, like Fredi Gonzalez was, to kind of help out Brandon Hyde? Or do the Orioles think now, okay, we've put our trust in him. He's been our big league manager for 6 years. He's managed a good team in a playoff race for the past 3 years of that. He's managed in the playoffs the last 2 years. He's kind of been around the block where maybe he doesn't need that more veteran presence with experience or a lot of experience behind him. That is certainly a question that will be answered as the Orioles go throughout this process. But I do have a lot of names who I think could be in the running here for bench coach. And number one is Buck Britton. He is the Norfolk Tides manager, the AAA affiliate of the Baltimore Orioles, and has been with the O's for a long, long time. Buck Britton, the older brother of former Orioles closer Zach Britton, was a 35th round pick of the Orioles in 2008. He played in their organization until 2014, never made the majors, got to AAA, bounced around with a couple other organizations in AAA after that, and then returned to the Orioles as a minor league coach in 2016. And since then, he's managed Delmarva, he's managed Bowie, and he has managed AAA Norfolk in the past 3 seasons. He's been a manager in the system since 2018. The Orioles have always had their eye on Buck Britton. They seem to really, really love him. There's a chance that getting rid of Fredi Gonzalez would have been a move to potentially just open up a spot to get Buck Britton onto the big league coaching staff and not risk losing him to another team's major league staff if he continues to just be that AAA manager year after year. He's going to be looking for a big league job elsewhere. This certainly could be a way to open things up to get Buck Britton up there. Now, if they don't want to do that, you could always promote someone like Anthony Sanders or Tony Mansolino or Tim Cousins, who are already on the big league coaching staff. That is also a possibility as well. But in terms of minor league promotions, if it's not, it would be surprising if it's not Buck Britton and it's someone else from minor leagues. If it's going to be someone from the O's org in the minors, it's going to be Buck Britton getting that job. But I think there are a lot of intriguing names outside of the organization who could be in play here as well. How about Don Kelly? Remember him, 10-year big leaguer, 2007 to 2016, most notably with the Tigers. He was the Astros' first base coach in 2019. That was after Mike Elias, but still, he was on the major league coaching staff there with the Astros, with a lot of people that Elias and Sig know. And he's experienced. He's been the Pirates bench coach for the last 5 years. Maybe if a little bit of a better team in the Orioles come calling, they could be all over Don Kelly. Rodney Linares is a really interesting name. He is the Tampa Bay Rays bench coach. He was a minor league manager in the Astros system for 12 years, from 2007 to 2018. So Mike and Sig, you would think, got to know him well. Rays hired him as their third base coach in 2019. He became the bench coach in 2023, and he helped coach the Dominican Republic at the 2023 World Baseball Classic. He's got a lot of experience. The only issue here is I think Linares might be getting close to a big league managerial job. So not sure he wants to jump to another bench coach role at this point. Another bench coach out there who could become the one for the Orioles is Omar Lopez. He is the Astros bench coach at the moment. He was promoted to that role this year when Joe Espada took over for Dusty Baker as Astros manager, and then Lopez took over as bench coach. But Lopez was also a minor league manager in the Astros system for 12 years, from 2008 through 2019. Was then the Astros first base coach for a few years before becoming the bench coach. And he managed Venezuela in the 2023 WBC. That included being the manager for Anthony Santander in that tournament. Guy with a lot of experience, but Lopez has been with the Astros forever. So the O's would have to make him a nice offer to get him to make a lateral move to a different organization. Now we'll talk about some guys who maybe aren't exactly in the bench coach role. One more potentially is Will Venable. He was on the Cubs staff with Brandon Hyde a few years ago. He is the Rangers bench coach. Not super likely, though, because he's behind Bruce Bochy, and who knows when Bruce Bochy could retire, but it could be soon, and it would seem like Will Venable is the next in line to be the Rangers manager, so not sure he would want to leave that job. But let's talk about some other guys outside the org who are not currently bench coaches, so it would be a promotion for these guys to get it. First is Morgan Ensberg. Morgan Ensberg is the Durham Bulls manager. That is the AAA affiliate of the Tampa Bay Rays, but he was in the Astros system for a while, for 6 years, basically the whole time that Mike and Sig were in Houston. Morgan Ensberg was an Astros minor league coach from 2013 to 2018, and the Astros liked Ensberg so much that I believe it was in 2015 they created a specific position for him that blended his love for analytics and sports psychology to help out the Astros at the minor league level. That is a really intriguing combination. Now, it could be a big stretch to offer him maybe a bench coach role, but since the Orioles also let go of Jose Hernandez, there's at least a coaching role open. Circle Morgan Ensberg for that. He joined the Rays in 2019 as their AA manager. He became the AAA manager last year. And when he was a manager in single A in the Astros system in 2018, his pitching coach was Drew French. So someone that a lot of the Orioles people know very well. Mickey Story is another guy that's interesting to me. He is the manager currently for the Sugarland Space Cowboys. What a name that is. That is the Astros AAA affiliate. He briefly played for the Astros, then became a minor league coach for Houston in 2017. So Elias and Sig know him, and he's been their AAA manager for the past 4 seasons. Kind of their version of Buck Britton, who is looking for that promotion. Maybe the Orioles could snatch him up. How about a little bit of an older option in Gary Jones? He is the Detroit Tigers. He is a, quote, major league coach, so kind of similar to Jose Hernandez's role for the Orioles. He had managed in the minors for 15 years before eventually getting onto big league staffs. He's been on the Tigers big league staff since 2022, was part of their awesome run, despite that thing ending over the weekend this year. But he also knows Brandon Hyde, and that is why he was on here. While Brandon Hyde was the first base coach for the Chicago Cubs, Gary Jones was the third base coach at the same time in Chicago, winning a World Series. Pretty cool connection there if they got to work together once again. Now, there's also the chances that the Orioles would go for someone that is like a former big league manager, whether it be recently out of a job or a few years ago, who could fill a similar role that Fredi Gonzalez did for Brandon Hyde and the O's for the past 5 years. Someone with more experience than Hyde that can help him really make those big decisions. I'm not sure which way philosophically they're leaning here, because you could argue, okay, Hyde would still love to have and could need someone back there with more experience, but also he's going to be going into his 7th season as big league manager for the O's. Like, remember, Fredi Gonzalez only had 10 years before that of big league managing experience. So Hyde at this point is kind of a veteran manager compared to some other guys in the league. So I don't know if the O's would make that hire, but if they do want to do that, some guys that could be out there: Joe Girardi, Scott Service, just fired by the Mariners, David Bell, just fired by the Reds, David Ross, who Hyde knows well from his time with the Cubs, could all potentially be options. And then there is one final name I got to throw out there, because he is actually currently a big league bench coach. He is absolutely qualified for the position, and it would be hilarious and amazing if this was the hire. Ryan Flaherty, who after finishing up his playing days with the Braves back in 2018, was it? Kind of started getting into coaching pretty quickly, and the Padres gave him a cool gig in their dugout. He actually got to be the interim manager or the acting manager for the Padres for a couple of games. I think it was because some of their coaches got suspended or had COVID or something, but Flaherty got to manage a few games a couple of years ago for the Padres. Then he got plucked by the Cubs this year to be the Cubs bench coach in 2024. Remember, Cubs bench coach? That was Brandon Hyde's last job before he got the Orioles managerial gig. His only connection to the O's is playing for them, and that was before Elias and Sig and all these guys were here. But man, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if Ryan Flaherty, who again, this is not just for the bit, not just for the meme, like he is very well thought of in coaching circles. He got multiple interviews for big league managerial jobs last offseason. He's probably going to get them again this offseason. But if it doesn't work out for him and he wants to move on from this Cubs role, I'm all for it. Give me Ryan Flaherty as Orioles bench coach. That would be unbelievable to have him back in Baltimore, bring him home. I would love to see it. But if you're having me guess, I would say number one most likely would be Buck Britton to get this job. Number two, I would say Morgan Ensberg. That is the Durham Bulls AAA manager, who I think the Orioles are going to try to hire in some capacity, even if it's just as a major league coach and not the bench coach, which is a little bit of a step up. And then number three, I'll say Mickey Story, number three, with Ryan Flaherty at number four, just because I want to get him on the list. But there was one final opening the O's are going to have that is for major league coach as they let go of Jose Hernandez. Now, you never know who it could be for major league coach. It could be a guy with a plethora of different sets of skills to get this job. But I'll throw out a few names to maybe just think about who the O's could add to this staff. That is coming up next to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can get them the NFL. They've got college football. They've got the NBA, the NHL. They got everything over at FanDuel. It's an awesome sports time. They got baseball playoffs. And again, you can do it all at FanDuel.com. So the one final opening for the Orioles is Jose Hernandez, let go as major league coach last week. And Hernandez has been with the O's for a while. He was hired as a minor league coach all the way back in 2010. 15 years in the organization, 3 different front office regimes he was under, was a big league coach since 2019 on Brandon Hyde's staff. He's been around for a while, but his role was, quote, major league coach. It wasn't hitting side, pitching side, anything like that. So you don't necessarily even have to fill this role if you're the Orioles, but if you do, it's kind of open-ended in who and what skill set you could bring on as another major league coach for the team heading into 2025. So it's much harder to find someone for this role. That's why I said someone like Morgan Ensberg, if he doesn't get the bench coach role, eyes on him to maybe come in. Someone like Mickey Story, eyes on him to come in, who I just talked about. But if it is just this major league coach role, my guess would be the Orioles identify someone currently in their minor league system besides Buck Britton. But, if Buck doesn't get the bench coach role, maybe this could be the job that Buck Britton eventually does get to still get him onto the major league staff next year. But if it's not that, someone in the minor league system who they really like, who they think can do something really critical with kind of an interesting job title for the Orioles. So similar to Cody Ashley getting that hitting strategy coach role, or, guys like Ryan Klimek for the pitching strategy guy, getting those roles on the big league staff. So look at, a Joshua Rodriguez or a Ramon Sambo who have some interesting roles in the AAA staff. Maybe they want to get someone like Justin Ramsey onto the big league staff in another role. Maybe Anthony Villa, who's currently the director of player development in the Orioles minor league system, someone they want to get to this big league role. It's really, really tough to identify a longer list of specific names who could get a role when it's just, quote, major league coach that you're potentially hiring for. That one's much more open-ended. I'm not going to stick my neck out there for any names that could get that job, but look for the Orioles to definitely get creative with that one. Bring in someone with a title you've maybe never heard of having, or a coach having in a big league dugout in the O's, continuing to advance the way they coach and develop their players to try and, first of all, win a playoff game in 2025 and continue to do well in the regular season and make hopefully some deep runs in the postseason as well. But that is it. Again, it's a lot of names out there. I'll give you one guess. I'll say it is opening day 2025. The Orioles have filled all three of these roles, left by Ryan Fuller, Fredi Gonzalez, and Jose Hernandez. Here's my guesses. Fuller's role is filled by Jeff Albert. I'm going to say Jeff Albert, the director of hitting for the New York Mets, who was with the Astros for a while. The bench coach role, Fredi Gonzalez's role, is filled by Buck Britton, and the major league coach role is filled by Morgan Ensberg. Those are my guesses. They are due to be wrong. Hopefully one of them's right. And this is kind of deep in the weeds stuff for major league coaches. So if I do get one right, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to feel really good about that. Either way, still be a new episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast coming to you tomorrow. We're going to jump back into, unless we get some O's news, we're going to jump back into those Orioles player season reviews for the 2024 campaign. Last week, we talked about Jordan Westburg, Colton Cowser, and Ramon Arias. We continue and maybe dip into the pitching side coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.